Still to come in Saturday in America, General David Petraeus on the potential Mideast ally that is amassing on Iran's border. Plus, Christianity growing fastest in Iran, a country where believing in Jesus is punishable by death. 2 Iranian Christians are here to tell us why. But we begin with our breaking news this morning. President Trump warning Iran it will be hit hard today as he is now en route to the dignified transfer of our 6 fallen service members. Nate Foy is in Tel Aviv with the very latest. Nate.
Hey, Kaylee. So at this hour, Israel and Hezbollah are exchanging fire across Israel's northern border with Lebanon, while the United Arab Emirates are reporting incoming Iranian ballistic missile fires and a drone attack as well. So take a look at some of the damage here in these regional countries. This all comes after Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian promised that Iran's neighbors would not be attacked anymore. Right here, you see the Dubai International Airport got hit with an Iranian drone this morning. Shortly before that, an Iranian drone damaged an oil facility in southern Iraq. Iran also claims it hit an oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz this morning. Meanwhile, Israel launched a new wave of strikes in Lebanon. Take a look at this new video. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz blames the president of Lebanon for not disarming Hezbollah. The U.S. bombing campaign continues in Tehran as well. President Trump promises, as you mentioned, a big wave of attacks today, as so far the U.S. has struck more than 3,000 targets in Iran during the first week of Operation Epic Fury. The U.S. also sunk 42 ships at least, as the U.S. continues to upgrade Iran's offensive and defensive capabilities. Also, we're learning from an overnight Israeli strike in Tehran that Israel destroyed at least 16 planes at an airport in Tehran used by Iran's IRGC. We'll send it back to you, Kaylee.
Nate Foy, thank you. Keep us updated. Well, could America's Kurdish allies usher in the next phase of the war? Reports are suggesting that the pro-America Iranian minority faction are amassing along the Iranian border and may be preparing to fight. President Trump has apparently spoken to Kurdish leaders.
The president has held many calls with partners, allies, and leaders in the region, in the Middle East. He did speak to Kurdish leaders with respect to our base that we have in northern Iraq. But as for any report suggesting that the president has agreed to any such plan is completely false.
When asked directly about a Kurdish rebellion, President Trump told Reuters, quote, "I think it's wonderful that they want to do that. I'd be all for it." And according to the New York Times, Kurdish forces based in Iraq are preparing armed units that could open up a new offensive with U.S. support. Joining me now is former CIA Director General David Petraeus. General Petraeus, you were, as I noted, the former CIA director, and Axios has a headline that the Kurds, backed by Mossad, CIA, could lead the next phase of the war in Iran. The CIA, as you would expect, and the Mossad declined to comment. But do you suspect that the CIA could be working with the Kurds on the border of Iran?
Well, we have worked with Kurds for decades, actually, really, at least since the end of the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. We worked with them to provide their air cover during that time. It was called Operation Northern Watch. We worked with them very closely during the toppling of the Saddam Hussein regime and subsequently. In fact, I was just back there a few months ago, as a matter of fact. They have terrific fighters. The Peshmerga, as they're called, are very, very hardy, very disciplined, very fit. But they are a small force, and you're talking about a country of 92 million, 93 million people. They have perhaps 10% of that at most. So I think you have to be a bit measured about what it is that they can bring to bear, even with help in some ways from Mossad and perhaps from the CIA. But if this is the initial element, if there are other elements that come along, there's some possibility. The real question, though, I think, Kylie, is will there be an element of the regime that breaks off? Because keep in mind that the regime forces, when you total them all up, the Revolutionary Guards Corps, a couple 100,000, the besieged militia, again, similar number, the National Police, 250,000, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, 400,000. When you add it all up, you're talking about 1 million men under arms, and they have shown a willingness to kill their own people. Tens of thousands of the demonstrators in January alone, and arrested tens of thousands more. So you need to consider the scale that's going to be required. And in my view, if you don't have a break off, if the Army leader doesn't come in with real headquarters and capabilities and guys with guns, with discipline and organization, I think it's probably unlikely that you'd see the toppling of the regime, although you could see some of these elements and perhaps some of the other minority elements, the Azeris, the Baluch, the Sunnis, and so forth, who might take up arms as well in their areas. But I don't know that this is going to topple the regime in Tehran.
I want to pull up an old headline I found from Newsweek in 2004, and it's about your time with the 101st Airborne. You were a major general, and they say this in Newsweek: it's widely accepted that no force worked harder to win Iraqi hearts and minds than the 101st Airborne Division led by Petraeus. The reason I pull that up is you're very familiar with working with a local population. No one wants to be in a forever war, of course, but how do you bring a click into this but support the Iranian people, who I think already have the heart and will to rise up, as we've seen?
Well, there's no question that they do. The question is whether there's real organization and whether there are people who are armed. And that's the issue here. Of course, what we were doing was conducting a counterinsurgency against Sunni extremists and others, and then eventually actually insurgents. What we're doing here is major combat operations against the major forces of another country. And finding that element that can actually stand up, would have organization, would have leaders. The problem is that every time Iran has detected anyone who might have those capabilities, they've thrown him in jail or killed him, just as they killed tens of thousands of the innocent demonstrators on the streets. So that's the nub of this here. I do think that the military is doing a spectacular job of achieving its objectives. Took down the senior leadership of the regime. It's taken down the air and ballistic missile defenses. And when President Trump and the secretary say that we're going to really pile on, we can really pile on because we can now use non-stealthy aircraft, the B-1 bombers, the B-52s, the workhorses, not just limited to the F-35 and the B-2 stealth fighter bombers and bomber, respectively. So that's going to pour on. We're going after the missile forces, their launchers, even their manufacturing facilities. Same with the drones. Sunk over 42, as you reported earlier, of their naval vessels. Trying to restore freedom of navigation in the Gulf and through the Strait of Hormuz as well. And going after the remnants of the nuclear program. Whatever might be left, we're going to make sure that it's never accessible to the regime, and continuing to take down the regime forces writ large, not just their leaders, but their headquarters, their command and control facilities, their logistical depots, and the rest of that. But at the end of the day, the regime force has dispersed. It continues to carry out attacks against our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and facilities, and even the host nation countries on the west side of the Gulf. You're reporting about that expected in the UAE right now, which has done a very impressive job, I might add, against drones as well as against missiles. So the military can accomplish all of this, but as the president recognized early on, it is up to the people to take advantage of the conditions that we might establish that could enable political transition. But that's going to take a very substantial force with real organization, real weapons, with real munitions, and so forth. And so I think we have to be very realistic about that here. In fact, I often note that when you are the CIA director, you have to deal with the world the way that it is, not the way you'd like it to be.
That is a great quote to remember and to live by. General David Petraeus, thank you.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.